Hello. Today I'm going to be talking about a controversial topic. As you can see from the description, from the title, it's about African Americans versus Africans. I'm going to be giving the African perspective of it. So before I begin, please consider liking and subscribing, and let's get into it. So, to begin with, to start with, African Americans. I do not refer to African Americans as African Americans. I normally just refer to them as black. Reason I do this is because from the black Americans that I've talked with, interacted with, and who we've been friends with, they don't really like the title of African American. They think of it as something that they just was pushed onto them. So they mostly just refer to themselves as black. Now, the issue that I've seen from these videos, I'm sure if you go to YouTube, you're gonna see a lot of videos of, you know, African Americans versus blacks, and people are gonna be saying like black Americans are gonna be saying that Africans look down on them. Africans, the stereotypes like look down on them and things like that. Some Africans are gonna be saying that you know the stereotypes, like, I don't know, black Americans are lazy, or they are you know it's a lot of nonsense that goes on. Oh, they don't have culture. That's something that I've seen many times, people saying black Americans do not have culture, they're lazy, and I've seen being violent also. So all these things, really, it's the internet. Anybody can come in and spew whatever they want to spew there, the same way I'm doing now, basically. So I'm gonna give you my perspective. My perspective is I treat people based on how they interact with me. So when I arrived in America many years ago, I've lived in America longer than I lived in Africa. So I think that's kind of different perspective for me now. But when I arrived in America, I was all, happy, and I was wearing my African clothes and thinking that, oh, when I see a black American, they're gonna be all happy, we're gonna be friends, and they're gonna be, you know, asking me, like, oh, where are you from? Like, very interested, and all these things. And guess what? Nothing like that happened. In fact, the opposite happened. The opposite, meaning that I did get insults, I did get worse treatment from the black Americans that I interacted with at that time. And it skewed my perception. It was something that made me feel, like a disappointment, like when you're expecting something and then the opposite happens, you get disappointed. So I had a relative who was going to high school back then in a majority black school, and the experience was 20 times worse. They were called all kinds of names, the typical insults, African booty scratcher, all those insults that any African who grew up here going to school, especially with black Americans, they have experienced. So it is very, it was very disappointing because, and I think that's what happens for most part with that makes some Africans change their perspective, and then they start, like, they would say, hating on these other black Americans, is because, for one, most Africans, when they move to America, they don't have money. They do not have money, so most of the times you're gonna end up living in the hood. Now, in the hood, it's not all joy and happiness there. You're gonna see all types of people. Of course, there are people who are living, day to day, just just working for their family, respectable people, and all these things. But also in the hood, you're gonna see, like the young people say, crash outs. People who are ready to snap and do violent things out of nowhere. You're gonna see the worst of the worst. There is desperation, and there is, all these types of things. This is the same in any hood in the world. Even if you go to Africa, in the slums, you're gonna see probably the worst of the worst also. You're gonna see crime, you're gonna see all these things. So for most Africans, when they move to America, some come from not very poor places in Africa, some come from very poor places. I know for Americans and other Western worlds, most think Africa is just, you know, all poverty and, flies on your mouth and, all those stereotypes. But my point is, for some Africans, when they move to America after they had, I don't know, master's degrees, they had all these things, they moved to America, then they move into this, what is considered a rough neighborhood. They're gonna meet very rough people, because you have to be rough to survive in those neighborhoods. You cannot be just a walkover. You have to be rough. So that colors their perspective, because they experience very rough welcome. It's a very rough welcome. Nobody's gonna put the red carpet for you. You're gonna get a lot of insults. Plus, most are gonna be dark skinned, and there is a big colorism issues within blacks, even within Africans themselves. So when they come to America, most black Americans are mixed race, so they are lighter skinned than Africans. So automatically, there's gonna be a visible difference for some, and in that case, they get all these discrimination, especially from people who is supposed to look like you. Like in my case, I was surprised because I was expecting from, my ignorance back then, I was expecting, the racism to come from white Americans, because that's what I'd been seeing on TV. But then I was surprised when the opposite happened, and all the racism, the insults, and everything else about my skin color and everything. I got it from black Americans, and that made me first disappointed, and then you get disappointment, anger, and all these things, and then you go on this slippery slope where you start seeing them as the other. Now, when you start seeing them as the other, in culture comes in. Culture is different in America. America is an individualistic society. It's not a community like in Africa. In Africa, where most people, you have to like respect your elders. You have to be, even the kids are beaten, and things like that to get respect. Respect, like, it's a big deal for the elders, and for us as other Africans. I'm not speaking for anyone. I'm really speaking like for a small minority. Let me say that small minority. When they come here, they see the level of disrespect that, well, people in the hood might have for the teachers, for the elders, the level of violence where you can even punch an adult, a kid can punch a grandpa, can punch the teachers, and that is super shocking for us. And that is what made, you know, that's what makes some Africans say you should not, telling their people, their daughters, their sons, do not date black Americans. That's another thing. Now, on the issue of culture, this I do not really understand it. Where some Africans say black Americans do not have culture, because that is, I think, one of the most ridiculous statements. Black American culture is the most well known culture in the world. It is the most copied culture in the world. You can think of anything entertainment related, anything sports related. It is normally black American culture. Black American culture have influenced music for generations. Music, sports, entertainment, like the way even people dress. You're gonna see kids in Asia, in Africa, trying to dress like, African American, black American celebrities. So it is clearly that is culture. They created a culture here. So it is just not, it's hard to explain this thing because it makes no sense, really. Everybody has their own culture. Now, on the issue of slavery that I've seen also, for black Americans, let me explain this to black Americans. For most Africans, they grew up in Africa. They never experienced real like racism or anything like that. I would go as far as to say for most Africans, they do not even realize they are black. I know I know this is ridiculous. Sounds ridiculous even coming out of my mouth saying it, but they do not think they are black. What I mean by that is because they live their lives. Of course they know they're black, their skin is black, but they don't live their life thinking I am black, so this and this. Because most of them look the same. When you live the same way around people who look like you do not think of your skin color like I am black. This person is white, because white people it's a minority in Africa, so there is no that black white thing. So trying to have an African understand your point of view, where for most times it's gonna be mostly like, I don't know, I didn't get this job because I'm black. They're gonna be like, that's kind of that's different way to see it. Now, do they get the wake up call? Of course, Africans, they get the wake up call very soon. Once they've stayed here, they've tried to apply, or they go to a wrong neighborhood and they get the police call on them. That's when they realize, oh, I am black. and then, they also, fill out these forms, and then you have to select race. That's when you realize, oh, okay, I am black. So you have to pick it. So what I'm trying to say is people have different experiences. There was no slavery in Africa. There was colonialism. There was colonialism. So what they think of is in terms of colonialism. They do not think of slavery because it never affected them. What they think of is colonialism. Now, everything that I personally believe all immigrants in America, especially, they have to acknowledge that without the effort of black Americans, there will not be even be immigrating here. Black Americans are the ones who have fought for all the freedoms that the immigrants here come from. Whether you're Asian, Hispanic, or whatever, black Americans were the backbone. They fought for it. They fought for the rights that many immigrants, African immigrants here, enjoy. Now, that being said, what I'm trying to say in this very long-winded thing is that for Africans, the way they see life is based on how they grew up. It is a nature and nurture situation. If you grew up a minority, most black Americans grew up minorities from the beginning, you will have a certain perspective of life. Africans grew up majority. That is Africans who grew up in Africa. And I'm not talking about Africans born elsewhere. Speaking of Africans who grew up in Africa, they grew up majority. That is why for them, this issue of race and everything, it doesn't hit them the way it would hit a black American. And that is why there is this difference where you would get, an African American maybe saying, oh, but you guys, you even sold us as slaves, you did this and you look down on us. For me personally, I all think all that is a waste of time. It's a waste of time. This African versus African American thing is a waste of time. All you need to know is people are different cultures, people are raised different, and how they grew up affects how they see life. If somebody treats you with respect, you treat them with respect. If somebody comes and treats you like dirt and garbage, you should not be, taking the high road also. You keep away from that person. That's just how it is. Now my views changed because, as I told you in the beginning of the video, when I arrived in the hood, because that's where most Africans move to. Either you move into the city, and in the city you cannot afford the rent. Like let's say if you move to New York, you cannot afford living in the middle of Manhattan. Many are gonna have to move to live in the hood, and in the hood there is crime. That is in all hoods. You might end up being a victim of the crime. There's a high probability you're gonna be a victim of a crime committed by another minority, because based on redlining and everything, minorities ended up in the hood. So because of that, that's gonna shape how they see the black Americans. That's why I believe some would say they're lazy, they're doing this, they're on food stamps, but all that is nonsense. I have seen, you cannot judge, you cannot generalize. That's all I'm saying. The same way you cannot generalize that all Africans are this and this, because there's a high probability the most Africans you're gonna come across either are gonna be West Africans, because they are majority in Africa, like mostly, like for example Nigerians or people from Ghana. So the African you're gonna meet, maybe most likely it's gonna be from Ghana, and they have an West African and an East African or a South African. It's day and night. It's totally different. So you cannot generalize because first you've not met every African. There are over 50 countries in Africa. They're all different. If you meet an Arab African from North Africa, I mean, they like to call themselves, I mean, most don't consider themselves African, but that's a story for another day. They have their own belief. People from sub-Saharan Africa, East, West, it's all different. So if you met an African who was most likely gonna be conservative because religion is a big thing in Africa, there's the issue, traditional beliefs of, a wife's role, a child's role, a man's role. All these things come into play. They shape a person, they shape a man, they shape a woman, how you grow up. So you cannot just generalize and say, I don't know, this person is this way and this way. The same way an African like myself, I cannot generalize and say, I don't know, Black American, maybe I was in the Bronx and then they were not very kind. They call me everything but a child of God. I cannot compare that with, I don't know, Black American maybe from the South. The way they act is, it's not gonna be the same. So long story short, I've seen this issue for many years from the time I arrived. The interviews, the insults being thrown back and forth, but it's like crabs in a bucket. You are all in a situation where you are minorities and you are fighting each other over scraps when really you should be acknowledging this person is different, I am different, we can live together respectfully. Respect is the biggest thing. Respectfully, and then everybody, you just mind your business. Like it's not that complicated at the end of the day. By the time I had realized, I'd come to the realization that not all black people are this way, not all black people are violent, not all black people are colorist. It was just a few months in from my arrival, because that my very first Christmas I spent it with a Black American family, and it was amazing. They were extremely kind to me, extremely kind. They treated me like family. They took me to their home. They even gave me Christmas gifts, and I'm not even part of the family. So clearly that removed all this perception that was now building up, because I was experiencing this rudeness and roughness from other Black Americans. So, long story short, respect each other, that's all I can say. And you'll be fine in life. If you treat people with respect, you'll be respected. You won't have to fight everybody, you won't have to do all these things, but you cannot generalize. The same way I cannot say all Africans, because Nigerians are very different from East Africans and are different from South Africans, even though they are all from Africa. So you cannot say, I don't know, Africans look down on this and do this, or Black Americans are lazy and all these things. All that, when I hear that talk, it is just ignorance. We are all born ignorant. I was ignorant, but you have to work extra hard to remain ignorant. So every day I try to learn, and that's why my perceptions changed. I realized these people who did all these things, even to my relative, all the bullying in the school and everything, they have their own struggles that they were going through. Maybe that's why they were doing all that thing. But anyway, that's, I could keep going on and on. It's too long, so I'm gonna just stop and see you on the next one. Please consider liking and subscribing and share on all the networks.
Oh my goodness!